Welcome to class students. Today we'll be looking at a very important topic titled Cultural Dimensions Theory, the Ofsted and the Tropinas. Cultural dimensions theory represents a systematic approach to analyzing and comparing cultural variation across different societies. This theoretical framework, primarily developed through the pioneering work of Greet Hofstede and Fons Tropinas, offer structured methodologies for understanding how cultural values shape human behaviour, organizational practice, and social interaction on global scale. Foundational principles. This theory operates on the premise that cultures can be systematically analysed through measurable dimensions that reflect underlying value system. These dimensions serve as analytical tools that help explain why people from different cultural backgrounds may respond differently to similar situations, make distinct choices, and organize their society in varying ways. The frameworks are particularly valuable in international business contexts, cross-cultural management, and global communication strategies. The Hofstede model. The Hofstede model developed through extensive research involving IBM employees across multiple countries identifies six fundamental dimensions that captures essential aspects of cultural variation. We have the power distance, individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance index, long-term versus short-term orientation, indulgence versus restraint dimensions. We have the Hofstede model, power distance. This dimension measures the degree to which society accepts and institutionalized hierarchical inequality. In high power distance culture, organization and social hierarchies are clearly defined and rarely challenged. Subordinates expect to be directed by superiors and authority figures are viewed as inherently different from those they lead. Conversely, low power distance culture promotes agilital- agilitarian relationship, encourage questioning of authority and minimizing status difference between organizational levels. We also have the individualism versus collectivism. This dimension examines the relationship between individuals and their social goals. Individualistic society prioritize personal autonomy, self-reliance, and individual achievement. People in these cultures are expected to look after themselves and their immediate family members, with social ties being relatively loose. Collectivi- Collectivistic culture, however, emphasize group membership, collective responsibility, and mutual interdependence. Individuals are integrated into strong cohesive groups that provide protection and support in exchange for loyalty and conformity. While masculinity versus femininity. This dimension addresses the distribution of values and roles traditionally associated with gender. Masculine cultures emphasize competitive assertiveness, material achievement, and success. This society often have clearly differentiated gender roles and value ambitions and performance. Feminine cultures prioritize cooperation, relationship building, quality of life, and care for others. They tend to have more fluid gender roles and value work-life balance over pure achievement. We also have uncertainty avoidance index. This measures how comfortable society are with ambiguous, uncertain, or unstructured situation. High uncertainty avoidance culture develop elaborate rules and regulation and institutional framework to minimize unpredictability. They tend to be less tolerant for deviant behavior and prefer clear structured environment. Low uncertainty avoidance cultures are more accepting of ambiguity, take greater risks, and are more tolerant of differing opinions and unconventional behavior. We also have long-term versus short-term orientation. This temporal dimension reflects how society balance respect for tradition with adaptation to changing circumstances. Long-term oriented cultures emphasize persistence, shift, adaptation to changing circumstances, and future-focused planning. They value pragmatism and are willing to subordinate immediate gratification for long-term benefit. Short-term oriented cultures prioritize immediate results, respect for tradition, fulfilling social obligation and maintaining face or reputation. We also have the indulgence versus restraint dimension. This dimension examines societal attitude towards gratification and pleasures. Indulgent cultures allow relatively free expression of human desires and impulses, encouraging enjoyment of life and personal happiness. These societies tend to have more permissive social norms and optimistic attitude. Restrained cultures suppress gratification through strict social norms and regulation, emphasizing control over desires and impulses, often resulting in more regulated behavior and pessimistic outlook. We have the Trumpinger's cultural dimension model, which deals with the universalism versus particularism, individualism versus communitarianism, natural versus emotional expression, specific versus diffuse relationship orientation, achievement versus inscription status, while we have the sequential versus synchronic time orientation, internal versus external control. Universalism versus particularism. This dimension addresses how societies handle rules and regulation and relationship. Universalistic culture emphasizes consistent application of rules and standards regardless of circumstances or relationships, while particularistic culture prioritizes relationship and specific circumstances over universal rules, often making expectation based on personal connection or contextual factors. We also have the individualism versus communitarianism. Why similar to the Hofstede's individualism collectivism dimension, Schopenhauer focuses more specifically on decision-making process and responsibility attribution. Individualistic cultures emphasize personal responsibility and individual decision-making, while communitarianism cultures prioritize group consultation and collective responsibility. We have the neutral versus emotional expression. This dimension examines how cultures handle emotional expression in professional and societal contexts. Neutral cultures value emotional control and objectivity, keeping feelings private and maintaining professional composure. Emotional cultures encourage open expression of feelings and view emotional transparency and as authentic and trustworthy. We also have the specific versus diffuse relationship orientation. This addresses how cultures compartmentalize different life spheres. Specific cultures separate work and personal life, maintaining distant boundaries between different relationship contexts. Diverse cultures integrate various life spheres where businesses and professional relationships often overlap and influence each other. Achievement versus inscription status. This dimension examines how society assigns status and respect. Achievement-oriented cultures based on status on individual accomplishments, performance, and demonstrated competence. Inscription-oriented cultures assign status based on inherent characteristics such as age, family background, education, and social position. We also have internal versus external control. This dimension examines whether cultures believe they can control their environment or must adapt to it. Internal control cultures emphasizes human agency and the ability to shape outcomes through effort and planning. External control cultures emphasize adaptation to external forces and acceptance of circumstances beyond human control. We have the application and implication of cultural dimension framework. This cultural dimension framework serve multiple practical purpose in our increasingly interconnected world. They provide valuable insight of international business operation, helping organizations understand consumers' behavior, employee motivation, and management practices across different cultural contexts. This framework also inform diplomatic relations, educational exchanges, and cross-cultural communication strategy. Understanding this dimension enables more effective cross-cultural collaboration by helping individuals and organizations anticipate cultural differences, avoid misunderstanding, and develop culturally sensitive approaches to interaction and problem solving. This framework continues to evolve as researchers refine and expand upon this foundational concept, contributing to our growing understanding of cultural diversity and its implication for global society. Communication style across region. We have the high context versus low context. So we're going to be looking at the difference between the high context and the low context. The distinction between the high context and low context communication represents one of the most fundamental framework for understanding cultural variation in human interaction. This theoretical model originally developed by the anthropologist Edward T. Hall, which provides essential insight into how different societies encode, transmit, and decode messages. The framework reveals that cultures develop distinct communication patterns that reflect their underlying social structure, historical experiences, and collective values. Understanding these communication paradigms is increasingly critical in our globalized world where cross-cultural interaction occur daily in business, diplomacy, education, and cultural relationships. This degree to which cultures rely on contextual information versus explicit verbal content fundamentally shapes how individuals interpret meaning, build relationship, and navigate social. So the high context communication culture operates on principle that meaning extend for far beyond spoken or written words. These societies have developed sophisticated system of implicit communication where understanding depends heavily on situational factors, shared cultural knowledge, and non-verbal elements. The communication process assumes that participants process substantial background information and can interpret subtle cues that may be invisible to cultural outsiders. So the core characteristic and mechanism are the implicit message transmission, the non-verbal communication primacy, the relationship-centered approach, and the contextual dependence. So the cultural examples of high context communication systems are the East Asian cultures. We also have the Middle Eastern society, that is many Arabs, and we have the African communities, that is traditional African society, often employs storytelling, proverbs, and secular conversation patterns that embed meaning within cultural narrative and collective wisdom. So advantages and strength of high context communication system. It fosters deep interpersonal bonds and community creation. This system promotes group harmony by avoiding direct and confrontational and allowing for graceful conflict resolution. We also have a low context communication system, which the culture prioritizes explicit, direct, and unambiguous message transmission. And examples are core characteristic and mechanism of low context communication and the explicit communication message, explicit message construction, verbal precision, task oriented focuses, individual. While cultural examples of low context communication are Germanic culture, the Nordic culture countries, the Anglo-Saxon society. Advantage is low context communication promotes efficiency and reduce ambiguity in cultural communication interaction. Decision making can be faster and more transparent as interaction and requirements are clearly stated. This communication style also supports merit-based evaluation and adherence principles by minimizing the influence of social hierarchies on message interpretation. Thank you for listening.